There are some things you never forget. The smell of your grandmother's house, the way her fingers curled slightly when she held your hand, the sound of her voice when she said your name like it was something important. And then there are the things you wish you could forget. The smirk on your aunt's face at the funeral, the way the whole room held its breath when the executor plugged in that flash drive, and the moment my grandmother's voice came over the speakers, slow and deliberate, beginning with a sentence that made every head turn toward me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Sam. I'm 29, single, work in tech, live in a city where the rent is too high and the coffee shops are always full of people pretending to write novels. I've been back in my hometown exactly twice in the last 5 years. Once was for my dad's back surgery. The other was 3 months ago when my grandmother, Margaret Ellis, passed away. To understand why her funeral turned into a slow-motion train wreck, you need to understand my family. Or at least, what's left of it. Grandma Margaret was the kind of woman who made an impression on everyone. She was old-school sharp, the type who still used phrases like, "Don't air your dirty laundry," and believed in handwritten thank you cards. She lived in the same house for nearly 60 years, raised 3 children there, and outlived 2 husbands. She was the matriarch in every sense of the word, but she wasn't warm in the traditional way. She didn't bake cookies. She gave advice like surgical incisions, short, clean, and impossible to ignore. She wasn't cuddly, but she was fair. That last part, fairness, that's where things started to crack. My mom died when I was 12. Car accident. I won't get into it here. After that, it was just me and Dad. He did his best, but he wasn't exactly built for single parenthood. He was the kind of guy who thought frozen dinners were an acceptable food group and considered a clean house one where you could see some carpet. Grandma Margaret helped out a lot. She'd pick me up after school, help with homework, make sure I had clothes that fit and shoes without holes. I never moved in with her. My dad was too proud for that, but we saw her all the time. Now, my dad has 2 sisters, Aunt Linda and Aunt Carol. Linda's the oldest, and she always acted like that gave her authority over everyone. She married rich, had 2 kids, and always had this air of judgmental superiority, like the rest of us were just extras in her personal movie. Carol, the middle child, was more flighty. She was the kind of person who got really into yoga for 3 weeks and then switched to essential oils. She'd show up at family events with a new spiritual philosophy and a different man every time. Neither of them had much to do with Grandma in her later years. Oh, they'd call. Once a month, maybe. Send a card on her birthday, sometimes with a gift card inside if they remembered. But visiting? Helping out? Making sure she got to her doctor appointments or that someone shoveled the driveway when it snowed. That was mostly me. Or rather, it became me. See, once I started working remote 2 years ago, I began spending more weekends with Grandma. Not because anyone asked me to, just because she was getting older, and I knew she wouldn't ask for help even if she needed it. I'd do her grocery runs, set up her TV when it started acting up, listen to her stories about growing up during the war. I didn't think much of it. I just figured she took care of me when I was a kid. This was the least I could do. Apparently, some people saw that differently. The first time I noticed something was off was at Thanksgiving, last year. Grandma hosted every year, even when she probably shouldn't have. The turkey was overcooked, the cranberry sauce was from a can, and the mashed potatoes had lumps, but it didn't matter. We all came anyway, because it was her table, and that's just what you did. This time, though, Aunt Linda had brought her husband, a stiff man named Roger who looked like he tasted lemons for fun, and their 2 kids, who were in their 20s and acted like they were too cool for everything. Carol showed up late, wearing a poncho and reeking of incense, dragging along a man named Derek who introduced himself as a healing architect or something. We were all sitting down, halfway through the meal, when Grandma asked me to pass the sweet potatoes. I did. She smiled and gave my arm a squeeze. That's when Linda raised her glass and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Sam, you've really been inseparable from Mom lately, haven't you?" I blinked. I guess so. Just trying to help out where I can. Carol chimed in. It's sweet, really. Some people know how to make themselves very useful right before the will is read. There was a pause. I laughed nervously. Is that supposed to be a joke? Oh, come on, Linda said. No one's accusing you of anything. It's just you've been spending a lot of quality time with her. It's admirable. Roger cleared his throat. Very noble. The rest of dinner felt like walking on eggshells. Grandma didn't say anything, but her mouth got tight, the way it always did when she was angry but holding it in. Later that night, as I was helping her put away the dishes, I asked, "Did that feel weird to you?" She gave a small shrug. "They've always been threatened by anyone who gets more of my attention than they do." I wasn't trying to. "I know you weren't," she said, and patted my shoulder. "That's the difference." I didn't bring it up again, but I noticed how, after that dinner, Carol stopped calling altogether. Linda still sent texts to Grandma now and then, but they were shorter, less frequent, like they were checking a box. A month later, Grandma asked me to help her scan some old documents into a digital folder. She said she wanted to get her affairs in order. I figured it was for tax season. I didn't pry. Then came the day of the funeral. She passed peacefully in her sleep. I was the one who found her. I'd brought over soup and a loaf of bread from her favorite bakery. When she didn't answer the door, I let myself in, and that was a bad day. The funeral was held at her church, the same one she'd attended for over 40 years. It was packed. Old neighbors, friends from her gardening club, former co-workers from the bank where she worked back in the 80s. She'd touched more lives than I realized. But the family section, that was awkward. Linda showed up in a black pantsuit, holding tissues she didn't use. Roger stood beside her, stiff as ever. Their kids came, too, both dressed like they were going to a cocktail party instead of a funeral. Carol arrived wearing sunglasses indoors, clutching Derek's arm, looking vaguely disoriented. She gave me a tight nod, then leaned over to whisper something to Linda. Linda turned and gave me a smile so condescending it made my skin crawl. I was standing near the casket, quietly talking to one of the ushers, when I heard Linda hiss to her daughter, just loud enough to be audible. "Let him enjoy his little moment. He'll regret coming when he finds out she left him nothing." I froze. My stomach dropped. I don't even know if she realized I heard her. But I did, and it hit harder than I expected. Not because of the money, but because she assumed, wanted, me to be shut out. And then, 10 minutes later, the executor walked in. His name was Mr. Cohen. Older guy, glasses, always wore a bow tie. He was Grandma's attorney and estate planner. He didn't say much at first, just nodded to me, then took out a small black flash drive from his coat pocket. "I'll need to set this up in the AV booth," he said. "AV?" I asked. "There's a video?" He gave me a tight smile. "Your grandmother wanted to leave a message. For the whole family." And just like that, the tone of the room shifted. You could feel it. A low current of anticipation, confusion, dread. 5 minutes later, the church organ quieted. The murmurs died down. The projector screen lowered slowly from the ceiling. And then my grandmother's voice came through the speakers, clear, sharp, and unmistakably her. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I am no longer with you. Which means I am finally free to speak my mind." You could have heard a pin drop. She paused, and then she said one sentence that made the entire room freeze. Especially my aunts. Especially me. Because what she said was, "Before I tell you what I've left each of you, let me tell you what you never knew about me." And that is when everything started to unravel. The moment my grandmother's voice filled the church, something in the room changed. You know how people shift in their seats when they're suddenly uncomfortable? That quiet rustling, like dry leaves in the wind? That's what it sounded like. People straightened. Eyes darted toward each other. I could feel Aunt Linda's stare burning into the back of my neck, as if she knew this wasn't going to go the way she expected. And neither did I. The screen was blank, just a simple black background with white text that read, "Margaret Ellis." A personal message. But the real show was in her voice. Calm, deliberate, just a little sharp around the edges. "My children," she began. "And yes, I still call you that despite the fact that some of you haven't acted like children of mine in a very long time. I imagine you're all sitting there, thinking this will be simple. You're wrong." I watched Linda stiffen. Carol tried to smile like this was all a joke, but she crossed her legs nervously and clutched Derek's arm tighter. Even Roger looked like someone had poured lemon juice in his coffee. Grandma continued, "I've been very deliberate in how I spent my final years. I had time. Time to reflect. Time to observe. And most of all, time to decide what mattered and who deserved to be remembered." My chest tightened. I didn't know where she was going with this, but I could feel it building like a storm cloud. I raised 3 children. One of you believed being the eldest made you a leader. It didn't. It just made you louder. Another thought life was a game of reinvention, but forgot that reinvention without responsibility is just running away. And one of you, her voice softened for just a moment, One of you left too soon. My mother. That was the only part that made Linda look momentarily uncomfortable. Then her voice sharpened again. And so, I'll begin with the truth. The truth I kept to myself for years because I was waiting to see if anything would change. If any of you would change. You could hear a pin drop. Linda, she said, you were my firstborn. I loved you the way a mother does, fiercely and without condition. But you made it hard. From the day you learned how to manipulate, you never stopped. You used your siblings like pawns, hoarded praise like gold, and treated me like a trophy you didn't want to polish. You called me difficult when I asked for help and demanding when I needed support. You sent flowers on birthdays, but never stayed long enough to hear me speak. Linda's face turned pale. Her daughter shifted away slightly. Roger frowned deeply, but said nothing. Carol, Grandma continued, you had a beautiful heart once. You were curious and wild and full of light. But life scared you, so you buried yourself in distractions and excuses. You promised to visit. You forgot. You borrowed money. You never paid it back. You told people I was controlling when the only thing I ever asked for was your presence. Carol opened her mouth like she was going to say something, maybe even yell, but then she didn't. She just sat there, eyes wide behind her sunglasses, fingers trembling slightly. The video paused, just for a second. A breath. Then Grandma's voice returned, softer this time. And then there's Sam. My heart stopped. You were never supposed to be my responsibility. But after your mother, my sweet, brave Sarah, passed, I couldn't stand by. I watched your father try his best, but I saw what you needed. So I stepped in. And you never made me regret that. My eyes started to sting. I kept my head down. I didn't want to look at anyone. You gave me time. Laughter. Company. You didn't treat me like a burden. You treated me like a person. That mattered more than anything else. She paused again. And that is why I made the decisions I did. There was a murmur. Shuffling. Whispers. But then, the video stopped. Abruptly. Everyone sat up straighter. People glanced toward the AV booth. Mr. Cohen, the executor, looked confused. He adjusted his glasses and stood. That was only the preamble, he said. There's more. But before we continue, per Margaret's request, I'm instructed to distribute a printed letter to each of her children before proceeding with the rest of the recording. He opened his briefcase and handed 3 sealed envelopes to an usher. One for Linda, one for Carol, and one, I noticed, addressed to Sarah in memoriam. That one was handed to me. Linda tore hers open immediately, like it was a race. Carol waited, then slowly slid a manicured finger under the seal. I opened the one for my mother. It was short, just a paragraph, handwritten in the neat, looping style Grandma always used. Sarah, if you were still here, I would have given you everything. But since you're not, I give it to your son. He is the best of both of us. I don't remember breathing after that. Suddenly, there was a loud thwack, the sound of paper being slammed against wood. Linda had stood up, her letter clenched in one hand. This is outrageous, she snapped. She's senile. She was manipulated. This is insane. The room recoiled. A few people murmured in shock. Even Roger looked mildly scandalized. Carol stood up, too, more hesitant. She didn't mean this. It was the medication. She had moments of confusion. Mr. Cohen cleared his throat. Ladies, I suggest you remain seated. The video is not finished. Why are we even watching this circus? Linda barked. She's gone. And you? She turned on me, finger pointing like a blade. You took advantage of her. You and your little act, playing the dutiful grandson while feeding her ideas about who deserves what. Don't think I haven't seen through it. I froze. My body went cold. I never asked her for anything. Oh, but you made sure she knew you were always around, didn't you? She hissed. What were you doing every weekend? Planting seeds? Telling her how awful we were? I bet you even wrote this for her. Carol looked like she wanted to disappear. And that's when Mr. Cohen stepped forward again. I'm sorry, he said, but Margaret anticipated this. He plugged the flash drive back in. A new video loaded. This time, the screen showed my grandmother sitting at her dining room table, in the floral blouse she always wore on Sundays. Her expression was unreadable. If you're seeing this, she said, then I assume my children are already yelling. So let me make it simple. She held up a legal document. This is my will. Notarized. Filed. Witnessed by 2 professionals. I was of sound mind and body. No one pressured me. And if you think for 1 second I would let myself be manipulated, Then you clearly never knew me. I nearly laughed. That was so her. She looked straight into the camera. I know you think I'm punishing you, but I'm not. I'm simply being honest. I love you. I always will. But love doesn't mean enabling bad behavior. It doesn't mean rewarding absence. And it definitely doesn't mean sharing equally with people who gave unequally. She reached for something out of frame. A small wooden box. She opened it. Inside were 3 items, a ring, a key, and a USB stick. I am giving each of you something meaningful. Linda, you get the Ellis family ring. It's been passed down through generations. Not because you deserve it, but because I know how much you value appearances. Linda turned red. Carol, you get the key to the lake house. I know you always dreamed of running away. Now you can, but you'll also see the mortgage statements. It's not just a fantasy. Carol blinked, stunned. Her mouth parted like she was going to speak, but didn't. And Sam, I leaned forward. You get everything else. Gasps. Audible ones. Not just from family, but from people in the pews behind us. You get the house, the savings, the investments, and most importantly, you get the truth. The rest is on this drive. The video ended. No music, no fade out, just a cold, quiet silence. Linda sat down slowly. Carol did too. But Linda wasn't done. She turned to me, her voice low but shaking with rage. You'll regret this. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I felt. Shock, guilt, gratitude, fear, but mostly confusion, because I had no idea what was on that drive. Until later that evening, when I plugged it in. And what I found changed everything, not just for me, but for the entire family. The night after the funeral, I sat alone in my grandmother's house, the same one I'd spent half my childhood in, now filled with the heavy silence of a place that had outlived its heartbeat. Her floral curtains swayed gently in the breeze coming through the cracked window in the kitchen. I hadn't changed the calendar yet. It was still turned to the month she passed. April. The last square had a note in her handwriting. Sam brings soup. My throat tightened. I hadn't cried at the funeral. Not when the video played. Not when Linda hissed her threat. But now, staring at that simple line, my vision blurred. I sat down at the dining table, the same place Grandma had filmed that last video, and pulled out the small USB stick the executor had handed me after everyone left. He'd given me a quiet nod and said, "She wanted you to watch this alone. When you're ready." I wasn't ready, but I plugged it in anyway. There were folders, dozens of them, labeled with names, dates, even scanned documents. Family history, letters, photos, final wishes, truths. I clicked on one titled simply, "For Sam." It was a video. My grandmother, this time wearing her old blue cardigan, was sitting in her sunroom. Light filtered in through the glass, casting soft shadows across her lap. She looked older than she had in the other videos, tired, but peaceful. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentler than it had been during the whole video. "If you're watching this, then everything's already been said and done, and I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe even guilty. Don't. You didn't ask for any of this, but you earned it, and more importantly, you deserve it." She smiled. "I've left you everything, not to burden you, but to free you. There are things I couldn't say while I was alive, not because I didn't want to, but because I was waiting for the right time. And now, I think it's time you knew the whole truth." She leaned forward slightly, like she was telling me a secret. "I was never supposed to raise 3 children. Your grandfather wanted 2. But Linda wasn't planned. And I think I knew, even before she turned 5, that something in her had hardened early. I tried to reach her, I did. But she always needed to be the smartest, the best, the first. And when she wasn't, she punished everyone around her for it. I sat still, watching the screen like it might burn through me. Carol was different. Sensitive, gentle once. But she let the world scare her. And instead of standing firm, she ran. Into boys, into bad habits, into whatever new thing promised to fix her without effort. She sighed softly. Your mother was the best of us. She had compassion, patience. She never saw people as problems to solve, just hearts to understand. Losing her broke me, Sam. But gaining you, watching you grow, seeing her in your smile, in your sense of right and wrong, that gave me hope again. She leaned back in her chair. There's more on this drive. Letters, bank information, a full list of assets, and instructions on how to manage them. But what matters more is what you do after. She paused. Her eyes grew sharper. I know your aunts. They won't take this lying down. They'll call you names. Say I was manipulated. They might even try to contest the will. Let them. You don't owe them anything. Not a cent. Not an explanation. But you do owe yourself a life you can be proud of. So live it. Boldly. She reached toward the camera, as if to turn it off, but stopped. One last thing. Oh, and check the box in the attic. The one with your name on it. You'll know it when you see it. The video ended. I just sat there for a while, the weight of it all pressing down on my chest like a stone. And that's when the call started. Linda was first. I let it go to voicemail. Sam, this is ridiculous. You don't understand how these things work. You're young. You don't know the pressure that comes with managing an estate like this. Let's meet. Just you and me. We'll talk. Privately. Then Carol. Hey, sweetie. I think there's been some misunderstanding. You know how Grandma was near the end, maybe not entirely lucid. I think we should all just sit down as a family and figure out what she really wanted. Right. Now they wanted to talk. The following week was a blur. The lawyer confirmed the will was airtight. I had to take meetings with estate planners, sign documents, transfer titles. It felt like I was playing dress-up in an adult world I didn't belong to. One moment I was eating leftovers on my couch. The next I was sitting in a bank office being told I now had considerable assets. But instead of feeling powerful, I felt hollow. The grief hit me like a freight train that second week. I stopped answering calls. Stopped checking my email. I moved into Grandma's house temporarily because I couldn't bring myself to leave it empty. The days blurred together. I didn't open the attic box. Not yet. Then one morning, I walked out to check the mail and found Roger on the porch. He stood there, briefcase in hand, suit perfectly pressed, like he was conducting some hostile negotiation. We need to talk, he said. I don't think we do. He stepped forward anyway, his voice low. You have an opportunity here. To show goodwill. To be the bigger person. No one's asking you to give up everything. Just consider what's fair. I crossed my arms. You mean what's fair to you? She raised 3 kids, he said. She had 3 families. Don't you think splitting it evenly would honor that? No, I said. I think what honors her is doing what she asked. And she was very clear. His jaw clenched. You'll regret this. I laughed. Funny. That's what Linda said, too. He turned and walked off, but not before muttering. You don't know who you're messing with. The legal threats started 2 days later. Emails. Formal letters. A lawyer representing Linda and Carol filed a petition to contest the will, claiming I had undue influence over my grandmother in her final years. It was insulting, and expensive, and utterly false. But I was alone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt small again, like the kid no one listened to. The kid standing outside a locked bedroom door, wondering what he did wrong. I spiraled. I started sleeping in late, skipping meals. The once cozy house now felt haunted by expectation. I didn't feel like a grandson. I felt like a target. And that's when I found the attic box. I hadn't intended to. I was looking for an old photo album and noticed the box tucked behind a pile of blankets. My name was written on it in faded black marker. I sat down and opened it slowly. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some addressed to me. Others were copies of ones she'd written to friends, charities, even the bank. There were photos, too, of me and her in the garden, at school plays, holding a trophy after my first chess tournament. And at the bottom, a notebook. It was a journal. She'd kept notes. For years. Detailing everything. Dates I visited. Conversations we had. Health issues she was dealing with. Times I helped her organize her meds. Repair receipts for when I fixed her roof leak. Proof. Documentation. And then I found the folder labeled, for the courts, if necessary. That's when something shifted. I wasn't just a scared kid in a grown-up's world anymore. I was armed. I handed the file to my lawyer the next day. He read through it, eyebrows slowly rising. This is a gold mine, he said. This could destroy their case in 5 minutes. And it did. The judge dismissed the contest outright. Said there was no credible evidence of undue influence and noted that the documentation showed a clear pattern of care and support from me and neglect from them. I walked out of that courtroom feeling 10 pounds lighter. That night, I stood in the kitchen again, sipping tea, staring at the same calendar with the note that said Sam brings soup. And I smiled. But I wasn't done yet. They tried to take what wasn't theirs. Tried to break me with fear and guilt. But they forgot something Grandma always said. When people show you who they are, believe them. And when they try to take what's not theirs, Show them who you are, too. And I intended to do just that. They didn't take the court loss well. The very next morning after the case was dismissed, I woke up to find two things: a dead rose bouquet on the porch and a voicemail from Carol saying, "We're not done." No context, no hello. Just 3 bitter words. But she was wrong. They were done. Now it was my turn. See, until that moment, I hadn't been thinking about revenge. I just wanted peace, closure, to grieve in my own way and carry out my grandmother's final wishes. But when they tried to rip that from me, when they smeared my name, dragged me through court, and made me relive her final years like I had something to be ashamed of, something in me snapped. Grandma had given me power, but now it was time I used it. And I knew exactly where to start. Her house wasn't just her home, it was her history, a fortress of memories. Every room had a story, every drawer a hidden time capsule. But it was also filled with papers, receipts, photos, and most importantly, leverage. I spent the next 3 weeks combing through every box, every shoebox tucked under beds, every folder behind bookshelves. And what I found was fuel. Let me explain. Linda, the eldest, the successful one, had always flaunted her social standing like a badge of honor. President of her neighborhood board, donor to the local museum, treasurer for the town's charity gala. Her image was everything. And Grandma? She had kept everything, including notes from past conversations with Linda, complaints about borrowing money that was never paid back, copies of bounced checks, a 2-page letter where Grandma begged her to stop using her name to co-sign for lines of credit. Then there was Carol. Sweet, chaotic Carol. She was always the flaky one, but I hadn't known how deep it went. Buried in a file labeled Carol Loans was a stack of IOUs. Scribbled notes saying things like, "I swear I'll pay you back, Mom, and just $2,000 to get through this month." Some were 30 years old. The total, once I added it all up, was over $72,000. There was even a spreadsheet Grandma had made, complete with dates and reasons for each transfer. A few were circled, with notes like casino or dubious boyfriend, but it wasn't just financial evidence. It was a window into who they really were, not who they pretended to be when people were watching. And people were watching. Remember that lake house Carol got in the will? Turns out, she didn't even know it had a mortgage. Grandma had been paying the monthly balance to keep it afloat. And when I checked the deed, I realized something interesting. While Carol was named the recipient in the will, the house itself wasn't transferred directly to her yet, because she had to clear the mortgage first. Carol, the dreamer, the escape artist, was now stuck with a house she couldn't afford and couldn't sell without my signature. I now held the note on the property. Meanwhile, Linda had the Ellis family ring, which at first seemed like a symbolic throwaway. But then I found an insurance appraisal in Grandma's files. Turns out that symbolic ring was a rare 18th century heirloom, valued at just under $65,000. And Linda hadn't wasted any time getting it appraised again. I knew because I called the jeweler myself. That's when the idea began to form. I wasn't going to scream, or threaten, or throw lawsuits their way. I was going to do what Grandma would have done. I was going to expose them, but slowly, elegantly, with a smile. The first step was making it seem like I was moving on. I posted a public thank you letter in the local newspaper, the same one Grandma used to subscribe to. In it, I thanked the community for attending her funeral, mentioned how grateful I was for her support, and included a small paragraph about her generous legacy and how I intended to preserve it through something she always wanted: the Ellis Foundation. It wasn't a lie. She had talked about starting a charity, something small, community-focused. I just never thought I'd be the one to create it. But now, it was the perfect shield. The Ellis Foundation would be used to fund scholarships for kids in the town, especially those from single-parent households. I set up a website, a mission statement, a clean, elegant logo, and then I made an announcement. We'd be hosting a garden dedication in her name, a grand reopening of the Ellis Garden, on the plot behind her house she'd always dreamed of restoring. A public event, invitations sent, local news attending, and of course, both of my aunts were invited. They couldn't resist, not because they wanted to honor Grandma, but because they couldn't bear to be seen not honoring her, especially now that the local papers had picked up the story about young man inherits estate, starts charitable foundation in beloved grandmother's name. I hired a landscaper to overhaul the garden, cleaned it up, added a stone pathway, planted her favorite flowers. I even restored the old swing set, the one my mom used when she was a kid. Every little detail was intentional, and every single piece of it reminded them, this was never yours. But the real move came behind the scenes. I started sending anonymous tips. See, Linda's position as treasurer for the charity gala? It required full transparency with her own finances. And thanks to some careful digging, I found that she'd been misreporting her income on grant forms for years, particularly using Grandma's name as a dependent long after she stopped providing support. I didn't file a report directly. I sent it to the board president, with copies of the documents. Carol? I took a more subtle route. I contacted the bank holding the lake house mortgage and asked what would happen if the co-signed guarantor, Grandma, was deceased and the primary recipient failed to assume the debt. They told me failure to assume the mortgage within 90 days would trigger foreclosure. So I sent Carol a certified letter, kind and polite, explaining that the estate could no longer support payments on the property and that the balance was now hers to handle if she wished to retain the deed. I knew she didn't have the money. I also knew she'd ask Linda for help, and Linda wouldn't give it, because Linda never gave anything without strings attached. A week before the garden event, I got a call from Linda. No greeting. Just, what do you want? From what? All of this, she snapped. The charity. The letters. You're poking the bear, Sam. You know people are starting to ask questions. I paused. I just want to honor Grandma's wishes. You smug little, she caught herself. This is bigger than you. Than her. You're making enemies you can't afford. I'm not making enemies, I said calmly. I'm just telling the truth. If that bothers you, maybe it should. Click. She hung up. The week of the event, I received 2 more voicemails. One from Carol, practically begging for help with the mortgage. We could just sell it together, split the profits. Come on, we're family. And one from Roger, threatening to go public if I didn't stop dragging Linda's name through the mud. I ignored both. Then, 3 days before the garden reopening, I received a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a copy of a letter Linda had written 10 years ago to Grandma, begging for a loan to cover a temporary shortfall in her business. Attached was a bank statement showing she'd spent that same amount at a luxury resort that same month. It was anonymous, but I knew who sent it. Grandma. She had prepared for everything. And now, so had I. Because the event, the garden dedication, it wasn't just a tribute. It was going to be a reckoning. A public one. The guests were arriving. The microphones were being set up. And I had one final speech to give. The one that would flip the last card and show everyone what they'd been too polite to say for years. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't fire and fury. It's standing in the sun, smiling, while the people who tried to bury you watch you bloom in the very garden they tried to kill. The morning of the garden dedication, the sun rose like it knew what was coming. It was warm but not too hot, the kind of day where the breeze carries just enough movement to make the air feel alive. The Ellis Garden, now blooming with color and memory, sat perfectly behind my grandmother's house. The stone path, freshly laid, wound through rows of lilies and lavender. At the far end was the bench she loved, now restored and bearing a brass plaque that read, "In loving memory of Margaret Ellis. A life rooted in truth." By 11 a.m., guests started to arrive. Locals, former neighbors, a few distant relatives, and even some members of the town council. A local reporter was there, setting up a small camera stand near the podium I'd placed under the big oak tree. I wore a dark blue suit, not flashy, not somber, just respectful. Grandma would have liked that. She hated people who overdressed for attention. At exactly 11:30, Linda and Carol arrived. Linda was wearing black, like she was still at the funeral. Roger followed behind, looking miserable. Carol had on a sun hat and oversized glasses, trying to look relaxed but failing miserably. She kept glancing around like the air was out to get her. I greeted them both with a polite nod. Carol tried to hug me. "Sam, this is beautiful." I gently stepped back. "Glad you could make it." Linda didn't even offer a handshake. "You're making a fool of yourself." I smiled. "Then this'll be entertaining, won't it?" The ceremony started at noon. I kept the opening short, thanked everyone for coming, spoke briefly about my grandmother's legacy, how she taught me to value kindness, truth, and community. I mentioned the Ellis Foundation and how we'd already begun funding scholarships for single-parent families in the area. The audience applauded. Linda looked like she'd bit her tongue hard enough to taste blood. Then I paused, took a breath. This garden, I said, is a symbol of my grandmother's spirit, but it's also a place of clarity. And if you knew her, you knew she believed in the truth, especially when it was uncomfortable. The crowd quieted. Some of you may know there were disputes after her passing. Legal disputes, accusations, threats. I let my eyes flick to Linda and Carol, who froze in place. But Grandma was smart. She saw things others didn't. She planned. I reached into my folder and pulled out a set of envelopes. Before she passed, she left behind letters, documents, and receipts. Today, in the interest of transparency and closure, I want to read one of them. Linda's voice cut through the air. This is inappropriate. The crowd turned. People were whispering now. The reporter raised her camera. I held up my hand calmly. You're free to leave, Aunt Linda, but this is my event, and I'm honoring Grandma's wishes. Roger placed a hand on her arm, silently urging her to sit. She did, stiffly. I unfolded the letter. It was dated 3 years ago. To whom it may concern, I read aloud. If you are reading this, then I am no longer alive, and my grandson Sam is facing the consequences of telling the truth. I swallowed, then continued. For years, I gave more than I should have to people who gave me nothing but excuses. My eldest, Linda, borrowed from me under false pretenses, claiming she needed business help while spending that money on vacations. She threatened to cut me off from her grandchildren if I didn't comply. My middle child, Carol, took loans and never repaid them, then told people I was emotionally abusive when I asked for accountability. There were audible gasps. One woman in the crowd turned and whispered, "That's awful." I continued, slowly, letting each word land. I kept records, not to shame them, but to protect Sam, the only one who ever came without asking for something. I leave this truth not for revenge, but for clarity. Let the world see who stayed when the others ran. I folded the letter and looked up. Grandma always said truth grows where the soil is honest. That's why this garden exists. That's why you're all here. Linda shot to her feet. You think this makes you noble? You poisoned her. You twisted her against us. Linda, Roger said quietly, standing and gently tugging her arm. Stop. No, I won't sit here while this fraud pretends he's some saint. The crowd was watching. The reporter's camera was rolling. Even Carol looked like she wanted to crawl under the bench. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I just pulled out the final piece. A scanned copy of a letter Linda had sent my grandmother 6 years ago, a detailed request for $20,000, claiming it was for a home renovation. Attached were receipts showing she used it for a luxury cruise, and a note in Grandma's handwriting. Denied future requests. Trust broken. I held it up. I have 27 of these. All documented. All signed. Linda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The tension snapped like a rubber band. Someone in the back clapped. Then another. And another. Not polite applause, support. Vindication. Carol stood up slowly, eyes wide behind her sunglasses. I didn't know she kept records. She kept everything. I said. She believed people should live with the consequences of their choices. Linda turned, red-faced, and stormed off, heels stabbing the ground like they were at war with it. Roger followed, silent, face pale. Carol lingered. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Apologize. Own up to it. But she just whispered, "You could have told me," and walked away. I didn't chase her. Instead, I returned to the podium and cleared my throat. One last thing. I gestured to the far end of the garden, where the swings sat. My grandmother used to say, "Don't plant seeds if you're not willing to stay for the harvest." She planted this. Every act of kindness. Every truth she protected. Every hour she spent raising me when no one else would. This garden didn't grow overnight. It grew because of her. I stepped back and let the moment breathe. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand. Some cried. Others offered stories of Grandma, how she helped them with taxes, babysat their kids, taught them how to budget. The local paper ran a front-page piece, "Truth Blooms in the Ellis Garden." The video of my speech went semi-viral in our town. Comments poured in. You honored her perfectly. Every family has a Linda. This gave me chills. A week later, I got word that Linda had resigned from her charity board. Carol defaulted on the lake house mortgage. The bank repossessed it. It was later listed online, and I watched the listing from a distance. It felt like closure, but I never gloated. Because Grandma didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be clear. In the months that followed, I transformed her house into something new. Half of it stayed preserved. Her room, her reading nook, her sunroom with the old blue chair. The other half I turned into the Ellis Foundation office. We've already given out 5 scholarships. Next year, we'll double that. And every time I walk through that garden, I think of her voice on that flash drive. Calm, deliberate, proud. You get everything else. And I did. I got the truth. I got my self-worth. I got my peace. And they got exactly what they planted. They tried to bury me, but all they did was hand me the shovel.